Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to introduce this project to you. We'll be publishing later this year. This is a multi-archive resource and it explores two key time periods for American publishing history. Through a large collection of records dating from the late 18th century, researchers can study the dissemination of literature and the establishment of booksellers and presses in a newly independent America. Key questions of this material could be: which books were the most popular? How did America want to establish its own literary traditions as separate from Great Britain? What might be the significance of publishing an American Bible or an American dictionary instead of importing from Europe? How might books have been sold across such a huge nation? And through all these materials, we can explore networks of organisations in the book trade, the involvement of a really huge range of businesses in the production and the selling of books. In the second half of the 20th century, America saw the emergence of independent presses and specialist publishers, who often represented authors and readerships from historically marginalised communities, including African American and Indigenous North American authors. These businesses offered new opportunities for those who had been excluded by mainstream publishers. They often acted as community hubs and became central to the development of literary genres such as feminist and LGBTQI+ literature. Through the records of presses, bookstores, printers, booksellers, and more, researchers will be able to trace the progression of books through each stage of the production process, whilst business and financial records offer opportunities to research the challenges and successes of running a press or a bookstore. On the screen here, you can see the key archives that have contributed to this collection. So the American Antiquarian Society represents the oldest collections in the resource and accounts for about half the total content of the project. And then the other four archives allow a more case study type approach to investigating the 20th century publishing industry, including the records of small independent presses and bookstores, for example, Lotus Press, whose collections are at the University of Michigan, and this was the longest running Black-owned press in the US. In terms of document types, we have a lot of material relating to the production of a book. So this could be author-editor correspondence, drafts, paste-up copies, author and licensing contracts, book designs, also material relating to the marketing and post-publication life of a book. So this could be poetry readings, author events, book signings, reviews, and then records relating to the running of businesses and independent bookstores, which include the Aquarian Bookshop and the Old Wives' Tales bookstore, which were very specific to the communities that they served in their region. I've touched on a few of the key themes that you can see on the screen already, but I wanted to particularly pull out the theme of women in publishing. We have some fantastic collections that relate to women-run publishing houses, such as Lotus Press, which was founded by the poet Naomi Long Madgett, who you can see on the screen here, and women's presses, and the female-owned bookstore, the Old Wives' Tales bookstore in San Francisco. There are also some tantalising references to women in the industry from the 1800s, from the really early material in this project. We can see documents that belong to travelling saleswomen, and also documents that refer to book collectors, printers, paper folders, and more. And you can really see the involvement of women in many different areas of the book industry, not just as authors, but also in the manufacturing and the dissemination of that literature. And study of the publishing industry really offers a lens into studying not just the printed word, but also the cultural and historic moment in which those words were published. Who was being given a platform and whose words were being silenced? Who might have had access to those published works? How were they sold? How were they accessed? Whether that was in a library or in an antiquarian bookshop? What impact would that publication have on a community? Thinking particularly of the work of the Old Wives' Tales bookstore, which was a feminist bookshop, but also stocked a lot of LGBTQI+ literature and educational texts as well. And with that in mind, I've selected a few highlights that really showcase the breadth of the topics that can be supported by these primary sources. So the first group of documents I want to talk about are the salesman's samples, also sometimes known as salesman's dummies. These are sourced from the American Antiquarian Society, and they were used by travelling agents of subscription publishers in the 19th century to persuade customers to purchase a copy of a work in advance of delivery. So here we can see the process of disseminating literature beyond the East Coast, where most of the publishing houses were based, all the way through the rest of America. A typical specimen book would consist of some sample sheets from that text in a sample binding, The customer could choose their preferred binding and spine styles. So you can see in the image on the screen, there's a few different options there for how people might want their books to look. If they had a particular library style, they might be able to order the colour of the binding or the colour of the text to match what was already in their library. The book might also include endorsements from well-known persons. It could be instructions to the salesperson about how to market the book, which angle to go to really sell it to their customers. There are also the blank forms on which the salesperson would fill in the details of the subscriber. Something else that is often included are the price lists, which can indicate the value of these books. One of them is advertising the complete works of Charles Dickens, and the 41 volumes in that particular collection are advertised as costing £61, 19 shillings and 18 pence, which is the equivalent to about £3,800 or $4,700 in today's money, according to the National Archives historic currency converter. So some of these books, as you can see, were incredibly valuable, incredibly important, and it's interesting to see how they were sold across the US. In here as well, as I've mentioned, there's a hint towards the involvement of women in the book trade. So a selection of these samples belonged to a Mrs. M.E. Waite, and she represented several publishers and booksellers and bibliographic societies, including the Grolier Club, which is one of the oldest bibliophile societies in America. There is a postcard in that particular collection that is addressed to an Anna Waite. So any research that can be done on this woman would be fantastic to know about, because it's not necessarily the image that you might have of a travelling salesperson of the 19th century. The second set of material I'd like to highlight is from the Sequoia National Research Centre, and these are the collections of Indigenous North American presses and authors. These are the organisational records of some small independent presses, mainly dating from the 1980s and 1990s. Through these, we have the author-publisher correspondence, production files of short fiction and poetry books. So these might be galley proofs or print proofs, original manuscripts, chapbooks, and then the marketing and promotional materials. So flyers, posters, book signings, newspaper clippings, reviews, and the printouts of kind of speeches and author presentations as well. Some key authors that are represented here. The first I wanted to highlight was Maurice Kenny. He was a poet, novelist, essayist, and teacher. He identified as Mohawk descent, and he founded Strawberry Press to publish Indigenous North American writers because they were just not being included and accepted by more mainstream publishing houses at the time. His poetry explores his heritage and highlights the contribution of the Mohawk Nation to North American history. And you can really see through his collection the dedication that he had to amplifying the voices of people across different Indigenous North American communities. Another key author that is nice to highlight is Carol Lee Sanchez. She was of Laguna Pueblo heritage and from New Mexico. She was a poet who ran open mic poetry readings at a gallery in San Francisco, wrote multilingual poetry, and is described as a multicultural consultant and community activist. And we have collections relating to the publication of key poetry collections entitled She Poems and Message Bringer Woman. And then the final person that I want to highlight from this collection, although there are many more authors and interesting people represented, is Doris Seal. She was a librarian in the children's department, a poet, a writer, and educator. And her particular focus was really about the depiction of Indigenous North American peoples in literature, children's literature in particular. And she campaigned very strongly for representation that was historically accurate and without bias or stereotype. And in the collections from the Sequoia National Research Centre, we're publishing a small amount of correspondence and production work for a book of her poems, which was the first book of hers to be recognised and published. And it's very touching and interesting to see in her correspondence just how surprised she is at the fact that her work was taken up to be included as part of the publication, and she is really surprised at the impact and the reception to her work. She has this fantastic quote, which is, "I write because I have to, and that's about it." And it's very touching, really, to think of somebody who had been writing poetry for a very long time and felt like she was very much speaking into the void, and to then get the recognition and for somebody like Maurice Kenny to have really taken her on is fantastic to see, really. And it really showcases the significance of publishing for the preservations of cultures, for education and for giving a voice to those who've been previously silenced. So I think it's a really exciting collection of material, and one which hopefully will open up some fantastic research opportunities. The final example or highlight that I wanted to share with you was the collection of documents from the Old Wives' Tales bookstore, and this is from the GLBT Historical Society. I've mentioned the bookstore already. It was a feminist bookstore run by women in San Francisco. Its purpose was to support the empowerment of women by providing books and information that was not generally available elsewhere. The bookstore's collection focused on lesbian, multicultural, international and feminist publishing, and included titles from small or emerging presses. So you can see here how the bookstore is not just supporting authors, but also supporting the presses themselves. Along with other women's bookstores, it worked as a distributor with feminist publishers that were created during the second wave of feminism. And in addition, it provided a community space for women and a space for education. Within the collection, we have these daily logbooks, which offer a fantastic and often quite funny insight into life in an independent bookstore. You can see conversations between staff about running the shop, the general frustrations of not having washed up their mugs, but also information about regular customers and conversations that people have had. The books that people are requesting, which books are particularly popular, and posters that are particularly popular. They also ran author events and were part of various kind of National Women's Day events and things like that. So you can really see the involvement of this bookshop in the community, but also in terms of providing support to the publishers and presses and the authors. So through these examples, I really wanted to demonstrate the variety of document types that we have across such a large period of history, and the themes that can be found in the resource, but also the opportunity to discover some fascinating personal stories of those who are involved in the publishing industry. Even if there's potentially only one or two documents that relate to them, I think it opens up avenues for some really interesting research, and I'm very excited to see what people will do with the site once it's published. Thank you very much for listening.